Hi, folks. I want to talk to you about a day a couple months ago, not even, when I found myself sitting on the sidewalk on a busy street in downtown Vancouver at rush hour. I wasn't actually sitting directly on the sidewalk. I was sitting on top of my kicking, screaming 10-year-old son. And as people are streaming by and looking at me and thinking, is this woman crazy? Is this child crazy? What the heck is going on here? I found myself wondering how I got there. Well, the short answer is I got there because at the end of the school day, my son was looking forward to his after-school YouTube time, but he hadn't gone to enough classes that day to earn it. And when he found out he wasn't going to get his YouTube time, he had a really epic meltdown. The somewhat longer story is that my son is an autistic 10-year-old for whom screen struggles are the core and the focal point of the struggle that a lot of autistic kids have living in this complicated world. And a day like this makes me realize more than ever how challenging the world can be for people who experience it and perceive it so deeply. And on this particular day, as I sat on top of him, I suddenly saw 4 pairs of boots in front of me. And I looked up, and there were 2 police officers. Well, not all of us experience screen struggles that lead to police intervention. But I think that the experience we are having as parents, the experience we are having with these screen struggles is really just a more intense version of the problem a lot of parents face. And in our case, I trace that struggle back to a day when my son was just barely 2. And I had recently gotten an iPhone. And this was kind of a special thing because I was in Canada, the iPhone wasn't released in Canada. I got my iPhone literally by going to a store in Chicago on a layover. And so back in those early days, people didn't give their kids iPhones. But I was at a retreat, the sort of Canadian equivalent of Esalen. We're talking like hippie central. My 2-year-old, at the time, I thought was just a pain in the ass because he was a 2-year-old boy. And he was tearing up the place. And so in a moment of desperation, I did what I would now say makes me a bold innovator in the world of parenting. I handed my child an iPhone. Well, if you want to find a way of freaking out hippies who have never even seen an iPhone, try handing your child an iPhone when they are only 2. I mean, the room went silent. People looked at me as if I had just set my son on fire, right? I felt like there was this collective judgment of what are you doing to this child? Don't you know he should only be watching TV shows on PBS and only that for 15 minutes a day? Well, I had to wonder if they were right, because this kid was a handful. And that was hardly the end of our story. I mean, today we have a kid who still struggles a lot with these screen challenges, and while at some moments it feels like screens are very adaptive, like this day when we finally got him out of the apartment we were staying at in San Francisco by letting him listen to the sci-fi book Ready Player One on my iPhone, a lot of the time it does feel like technology has become the problem rather than the solution. So I find myself wondering, what do we do? Particularly because as this child got older and we realized it wasn't just that he was a boy, but that there might be some other stuff going on, we had to take him in for a psych ed assessment, a psychological educational assessment. When you have a kid who, hypothetically throws furniture at his teacher, they ask you to get one of these. And when he was 6 and we finally got this assessment, we discovered something. It was not just that he was a boy. It was that he was a boy with a 99.99th percentile IQ and significant fine motor lags, so that all the stuff that was going on in his brain couldn't come out into his hands. And so the psychologist looked at us and said, "What are you doing? Why aren't you giving this kid a computer? How can you expect him to function in school without a computer?" right? Like classic parenting moment. Damned if you do, damned if you don't. You flip the switch on, you give your kid the iPhone, the hippies stare at you like you're some kind of child abuser. You flip the switch off, you keep the screens away, and you discover you're disadvantaging your child because they're not getting the tech support they need. Well, I think this dilemma is one a lot of us struggle with as parents. And so I did what I assume any parent does, which is I conducted a study of 10,000 parents and, survey research, right? Now, admittedly, the fact that my go-to parenting strategy involves large N statistical research may tell you a little something about how I ended up with an autistic child. But I was lucky to have access to that kind of sample through the job I was doing at the time. And it was interesting because when I went to the data and looked, how are parents handling this? I discovered that there really were 3 very different kinds of approaches that parents were taking to the digital world. We had one group who I call limiters, 32%. You see them here in red. And these were folks who focused on minimizing their kids' use of technology. At the other end of the spectrum, we had this group I call enablers. These are the folks who say, kids these days, I'll let them figure it out. And their kids have an awful lot of tech access. But then there was this middle group who I've come to call mentors. And like the limiters, they have some rules about technology. They have screen time limits. But they also spend a lot of time and energy encouraging their kids' use of technology. Well, it was an interesting discovery for me because on the one hand, it confirmed that I was not crazy. I really was caught between a rock and a hard place. There really was a profound division among parents on how we should handle this new world of technology with our young children. But on the other hand, I didn't have an obvious path forward. So we split the difference. We gave our son an iPad to take to school so that he could work on a screen. But at home, we took away the gaming consoles that had become such an object of obsession for him. But as you can see, taking away gaming consoles doesn't exactly remove technology from our house. This is literally like what our dining room table looks like all too often. And so I started to wonder, well, maybe the reason this kid is so freaky is because we are just like too plugged in. We're too wired. My husband and I both work in tech. This is like a very stressful situation for me to be separated from my iPhone for like 12 entire minutes. And so maybe the problem here is just all the technology he's surrounded with. Maybe that's why this kid is having so much trouble. Well, I took a look, and it turned out that actually, while mentor parents do spend a little bit more time online, you can see that they're more likely to visit news sites on a regular basis. They're more likely to read blogs. They're more likely to play online games. It's not a massive blowout. And even more interesting, how much these different parents spend time online does not predict how their kids go online. Because even the limiter kids, once they get access to the good internet-y goodness, spend a hell of a lot of time texting. I mean, like a lot of texting. You can see here, 64% of limiter kids text message every day, compared to the mentor kids, where we're seeing only half. So simply being a compulsive technology user, as my husband and I are, is not in and of itself reason to think our kids are going to go hog wild online. Nonetheless, we continue to have screen struggles, because no sooner had I taken the gaming consoles away than my son discovered you can watch other people play those games on YouTube. So I blocked YouTube from the home network. He figured out, turn off Wi-Fi on the iPhone, and the only consequence of watching YouTube is a $1,000 data bill at the end of the month. So that led to the next question. Were all of our efforts at managing his technology use just turning him into like a baby hacker? Were we setting him up to be the next cybersecurity threat? Well, I did a survey again. You can find this one in the Wall Street Journal. And what I discovered was actually the kids who are most likely to get into trouble online, whether you're looking at porn whether you're looking at purchasing stuff on their parents' credit cards without permission, whether you're looking at chatting with strangers online, which is something almost half of limiter kids have done. Well, those are all problems that are far more common among kids who are prevented from accessing technology than among kids who are guided through using technology. And this finding, more than anything else, convinced me that the only way to engage with our son's use of technology was by actually supporting and guiding him through it. Well, what does that look like? We now have a family technology policy. It is very long. Your legal department would be daunted by it. And that technology policy, which we revise every 6 months, now allows for a limited amount of YouTube time if you go to all your classes. Which brings me to that fateful day a month ago. When my son and I got to our car in the parking garage at the end of the day, and he realized that he had not gone to the classes he needed to attend if he wanted to have his Holy of Holies YouTube time. And I'll be honest, that was a lousy moment, because for a kid who feels so deeply, and for whom the internet is a refuge, and for whom YouTube time is that one moment of the day when the world feels manageable and predictable, losing YouTube time is devastating. And as my son sometimes does in those moments of sheer and utter despair, he wanted to die. He looked at me and he said, if I can't have YouTube, I can't survive this feeling. I cannot handle this feeling. He lay down in the garage, and when I pulled him off the garage floor, he seemed to collect himself. He ran to the elevator. I followed him up onto the street. I thought he was going to his dad's office, and instead he tried to run directly into traffic. And I pulled him back, and I held him down. And that's where I was when I looked up and saw this police officer. And she looked down at me and asked what was going on. Well, I wasn't in a position to show her my research. So I just said, my son's autistic. And she said, how can we help? And I told her. I told him he hadn't earned his YouTube time, and I can't give in. And she looked at me and said, you're right, you can't give in. Thank you.